Welcome. Hello, everybody. I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much. Workplace Wellness Talks. I'm Sumana Jetty. Let me know you're here. I want to see those comments start popping up. This live stream should be on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So, my very first question to you is to tell me whether you're joining me from LinkedIn or from YouTube. Are you burnt out on burnout? That is the question today. We have an expert on our stage today. Super duper excited to have her on stage. So let me just see a couple of chat messages here. Tell me you're watching. Tell me you're here. I see a couple of people watching. Put it in the comment. Tell me if you're from LinkedIn or if you're watching it from YouTube. And why are you here? My first question to you is, why are you here? What made you want to click the button that said, are you burnt out on burnout? Brenda Pearson, hello. Nasheen is from LinkedIn. Rebecca O'Brien, all the way from Sweden, is from LinkedIn. So I do see a little LinkedIn logo, so I guess I can recognize if you're from LinkedIn or from YouTube. Thank you so much. Why don't you invite some of your friends so they can watch the live stream? Extra special guest, extra special show. Why are you here? I want to know that question from you. And while you're kind of thinking about that, also tell me your work title and your industry. I also want to know where you are coming from, what your industry is. This is an inclusive event for everybody. Who do we have here? We have Nasheen, okay, and we have Sajid. Thank you so much for being here. This is a highly interactive show, so we want to see those comments and chats in. I'm going to bring Jen up on stage in just a couple of seconds. I want to, first of all, thank you for being here. This is such a wonderful day to spend the Wellness Talks hour with me. We're going to spend about 45 minutes. You are going to have tons of time to ask questions to Jen. So if you have a question that you're thinking about, put it in that chat box, because the first couple questions that come up, you will get an opportunity to have that question answered by Jen. I have a whole bunch of questions that I want to ask her as well. I also want to thank Matt. Matt is our producer from Lemon from Heaven. So if you were watching live stream last week on the Workplace Wellness Summit, we had Lemon from Heaven sort of produce the entire 2-day event. So he's back doing all the back end work. Without him, I don't think I'll be here today. So thank you, Matt, for your support. And also thank you, Restream. I think we have a manager also in the back end monitoring this Restream, because the Workplace Wellness Summit was a little bumpy, but we're going to have a good time today. And I also want to thank you. I think I've already thanked you once before, but thank you, audience, for spending your hour with me and for learning about wellness and for being invested in your workplace wellness, your well-being, and finding those strategies so you don't burn out. I always give you something to think about. So I'm going to give you 3 rules of engagement for today's conversation. The first rule of engagement is to be interactive. So please make sure that you are commenting, whether you're watching this from YouTube or if you're watching this from LinkedIn or maybe even on Twitter. We have Sean from Restream who's saying, yes, this looks good. That's wonderful. Make sure that you are asking the questions and make sure you're commenting and make sure you're clapping. Use that clap emoji. When I bring Jen up, I want to see a bunch of those clap emojis, because she is such a wonderful human being, so delightful off stage. I just met with her and I can't wait to bring her up on stage. Second rule of engagement is to network. If you see somebody here in your little chat box, in your virtual, environment, you want to say hello to them, you like their comment, you like their LinkedIn photo or their YouTube bio, make sure you connect with them, make sure you get to know them a little bit. This is a space for you to be interactive with industry experts from around the world. This is a global event, so make sure you make a friend today. And last but not the least, have loads of fun. This is going to be super interactive, lots of learning, lots of energy. As you can see from me, I'm generally pretty energetic as it is, but I'm like extra energetic today because Jen's going to be on stage. So without further ado, I want you to send me your clap emoji. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, tell me why you're here. Now, the wittiest comment, whoever gives me the wittiest answer about why you're here is going to win a Starbucks gift card. Of course, because I like to give away gifts to people. And there's also going to be a Starbucks gift card winner for the question that you asked me if you registered for the event before the LinkedIn Live started. Your name will be announced at the end of the show. But the wittiest comment, why are you here today? That is the answer I'm looking for. You can use a GIF, you can use a meme, you can use an emoji, whatever you want. This is your opportunity to shine. Without further ado, let's welcome the expert on workplace wellness, a well-known author. She is an award winner, Jen Moss on a stage. I'm going to go do a little clappity clap. Hello!
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. It looks like there's lots of people engaging, so that's wonderful. I love it.
So happy that you're here. And a little backstory, you guys, about Jen Moss. She showed up on my For You page on TikTok. Some of you know that I do make TikTok. So she showed up on my For You page, my weekly scrolling. I'm like, oh my goodness, what is Jen doing on TikTok? And I, of course, followed her, and I've been following her for a while now. Her book, The Burnout Epidemic, is a great book. So if you haven't already read it, or I actually listened to it on Audible. So if you haven't listened to it or read it, go grab that book. It's on her website. So we're going to get the party started. So Jen, I'm not going to ask you tell me about yourself. I'm going to ask you to tell me about yourself in a different way. I know you have all these accomplishments and accolades, but describe yourself in a way that is not dependent on those accomplishments and accolades. Let's hear from you.
Oh, well, I love this because I get highly embarrassed when anyone reads a bio or I talk about those types of things. It really does feel like I'm a bit shy about that kind of stuff. But I would say that who I am as a person is actually, you know, really not just a mom first, but I look at sort of the ecosystem of my life and who I am, and all of those parts of me play a role. I remember one time when I was as a founder of a tech startup, and there wasn't a lot of women in this space, and women in tech at the time just had to really battle to be heard, to be seen, to be funded. And, I had one woman tell me not to talk about my kids in front of people because it diminishes my power. And I thought that is the opposite of what I think makes me special, is that I have this other part of me that plays into my passion. Why do I care about workplace happiness? Why do I care about well-being? We spend 50% of our waking hours there. And for so many people, it sucks the life out of them. And so I'm doing this for a generation. I'm doing this to leave a legacy. I want my kids to play a role in why I'm so passionate. And so I think that we should always be authentically connected to who we are, whether someone says that's not going to make us look cool, or we're not going to look as smart, or that's going to diminish our power. We need to look at these other parts of our lives and say, that's what I'm doing this for, and why I should also be preventing my burnout. Because when it really comes down to our deathbed regrets, what are we going to regret? Not being there with our family and the people that matter in our lives and having social connections? Or will it be that I didn't send that email out at 11 o'clock at night to that client? So that plays a really big role in my passion for this work.
I love that. And it's such a good comment about identifying yourself and describing and I love that question. I actually learned about describing myself from an improv class that I took from someone else that I met on LinkedIn here. And, I used to describe myself as, oh, I'm Sumana Jetty. I am the manager of infectious disease epidemiology. I work in the government. That was my introduction. But get rid of the title, get rid of that. What is Sumana? And now when I'm running my own business, Sumana is more than that. So the idea of like, what is your legacy? I think there's like a very old video on Instagram where I shared something about what is my legacy going to be. And you're right, we don't want to spend at our deathbed, especially with COVID. I lost a parent to COVID, and you think back to like, well, what is my life all about, and do I really want to live this way? So audience, I want to hear from you. Are you a parent? And I did ask you to share your work title and industry, but tell me a little bit about what makes you unique. What is your description beyond your work title? And let's keep those sort of comments coming in as well. So Jen, in your book, you had shared a little bit about when you wrote the book, The Burnout Epidemic. You had shared that you were in a burnout. How are you feeling now? How has your recovery been?
Well, it's interesting because before the pandemic started, I was writing a book on burnout, which is really interesting. But that actually came from my time spent in this role as a female founder, and I just said yes to everything. I felt like I had to be everywhere all time, be everything to everyone, and I burned out in that role. And what I came to understand is that my relationship with work had become sort of moved from harmonious, where it was fueling me, to obsessive. And I wasn't actually enjoying the work in the way that I used to. And I was feeling less effective. And all of these signals of burnout that I didn't recognize were burnout were happening to me. And when I went through that process where I finally hit the wall, and this is what I'm trying to prevent people from doing is, they experience these symptoms, stop it before they hit a wall. Because for me, it was 4 to 5 months of recovery. I had to leave my role in that co-founder role of that company I had built, and I had to reestablish relationships. I was very unwell. I was suffering from depression and increased anxiety. So what led me to study burnout, and this is 3 to 4 years leading up to the pandemic, was how to create this prevention strategy for folks, understanding that workplaces play a huge role and that it isn't an individual problem to solve. So that put me inside of the pandemic with a lot of tools and a lot of resources. But there were many ironic moments as I'm mom three, juggling the demands of being terrible at homeschooling and being locked down, and I was terrible at it, and writing this book in my bedroom. I used to have this quiet house. All of a sudden I have a sign on the door that says, unless you're bleeding or on fire, don't knock. And it was just extraordinarily difficult. So I had to use those tools, but I was able to fare a bit better because I knew where my priorities remained. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and that's super important as well. Like, I can relate. I don't have kids, but I know lots of my friends have children, and balancing I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a manager or a director or a CEO. There's so many roles that you have to play and still kind of keep it together. Like, I do talk a little bit about, it was really hard on single people to be in isolation all the time. But I think the challenges of parents, and I know we have someone here, Joanna, who is a speaker at our wellness summit. She says, I am here to get rid of the mama bear narrative. I have, Matt, do you want to pull that comment up from Joanna on screen there? So that's the comment right there. I have a hunch that it might be part of an overwhelm narrative. Any thoughts on that comment from Joanna?
Well, I guess I'm not sure what a mama bear narrative is. It's so interesting, but I'd love to hear what that means. What does it mean to be a mama bear? And part of the overwhelm narrative, is it just that we feel like we have to do it all and there's an expectation placed on us? We don't have enough self-compassion. We need to let things go, because I do talk about that a lot, this sense of toxic productivity and feeling like we need to constantly be managing things all the time on top of being, dealing with the macro stress, and, we're in brain fog, and who cares if the dishes are done or not done. There was a huge impact on women when we look at just the amount of unpaid labor that women had to engage in the pandemic. It was around 15 to 20 hours extra per week. And so now we're seeing 1988 female labor force participation globally because of this exodus of women. And so there's self-induced pressure, but there's a lot of societal pressure that, we're just, it's part of the system, which is why when I talk about lack of fairness as a root cause of burnout, organizations need to establish better support systems, better protocols, because women are disproportionately impacted, whether that's what we want to be true or not, it is. And so how do we make sure that there's better subsidized care, there's more paid leave, there's care leave, we have better, more equitable maternity and paternity leaves, because and change the language around that. It should be parental leave, and then everyone gets it, no matter if you adopt a child, or if you have a baby, or if you're the father, the mother, whatever you are to that child. If you're the primary caregiver, you get time off. And so a lot of this is societal, institutional, that needs to change, so that we don't feel maybe what you're interpreting, or what you've claimed as mama bear narrative. And I think we do have to change that, but it takes a lot of work on all sides to make that work.
Yeah, and I know one of the, I love that you said let's change the vocabulary as well. When I went on, so I worked in healthcare, and I've been in healthcare. That's been my passion in disease management and surveillance. So the space that I worked was in analytics, and I worked with a lot of men, not a lot of female analysts or people even in leadership positions. There weren't a lot of females there. I would probably be like, there would be 3 women there. I'd be the youngest manager in a sea of men. Um, And when you say something like, hey, when I went through my burnout as well, and I was starting to feel all of those things that you talk about in your book, and I'm sure we all know what burnout feels like. The idea of like, oh, Sumana's away on stress leave now. And so they would say it's just stress leave. And stress leave always had like this weird kind of like taste in the mouth. And people were like, oh my God, you went on stress leave. That must be so bad for you. And it never felt good to take that stress leave. And no one wanted to talk about it. Everything was always sort of hush hush. And it felt bad, taking the leave. And then it felt even worse coming back from the leave because you're like, now I got to deal with all of these people coming at me because I took stress leave. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I love that you're talking about this because it's so accurate. In the book, you would have seen this research or interview that I did with several physicians, and they would say that they were taking sabbaticals. So they would fake sabbaticals instead of saying that they're actually leaving because of burnout, even though all of them sort of within the group knew, but no one felt like they could talk about it. And so we're seeing some changes around that. This big Lorna Breen, especially in the US, this new act that's going to improve mental health conversations in the workplace, but this is specific to healthcare. There's lots of other organizations and firms and sectors, industries like finance and tech. You take time off saying it's because of burnout, they think, oh, well, you just couldn't hack it, or you're not committed enough, or you just didn't have the capacity. But when you look at what causes stress leave, it's not because you didn't engage in enough self-care. We need self-care. Of course, it's really important. We need to optimize. We need to make sure that we're healthy. We need to have, increased life satisfaction, happiness. But when you are feeling this kind of chronic stress at work, it's caused by so many other different things that are out of your control. Workload, chronic workload. How many hours have you worked in a week? So many people are saying they're working 60, 70 hours a week, which is unsustainable. Maybe you're feeling like you're chronically discriminated against. There's no fairness. Maybe you are micromanaged. You have no agency in how you work, where you work. You have no community. The isolation piece was a huge factor this last year, and it's been a problem for a long time. We saw young people living alone, the most unhealthy. So we do talk about parents, but it really is single people without kids that have the highest level of decreased well-being over the last 2 years. So this is a thing that we need to acknowledge, is that when people get to the point of being on, mental health disability leave, which is the highest that we've seen in those claims in the last month over history. So when we see that happening, it's not that person's fault that that's happened. It's the institution's fault that has pushed them to get to that point where they cannot sustain it any longer.
Yes, let's see some emojis for that comment. I mean, this isn't an individual problem. This is an organizational problem. And I also used to feel the same way when I took that stress leave. It was like, oh, people are going to think I wasn't committed enough. People are going to think, oh, well, she's a female manager who couldn't quite make it with all the hustle that's going on. In your book, you also talked a little bit about the corporate hygiene and the culture piece, which I'm a huge fan of. We have a couple of people here in our audience who are culture collaborators, culture advocates. So your recipe for culture was people, policy, and leadership. Love all of them. I think I loved your book, but the last section about leadership was the one that I loved the most because I'm so passionate about leadership. So talk to me a little bit about, or teach our audience a little bit about, now that we know what burnout is. Everybody kind of has a good idea of what it is. The corporate hygiene components and the cultural components, what can we change now that now we're moving towards sort of the recovery stages, we're moving towards changes that are more bigger, and you talk more about those downstream versus upstream measures. So what does corporate hygiene look like moving into our post-pandemic world?
And I love that you're asking that, really, because we are in a recovery, we are in a healing. People feel still a lot of hangover. There's a huge amount of social anxiety about returning to the office, what that looks like. And any leader right now, or firm or organization, that is saying, let's jam the toothpaste back in the tube, is really tone deaf here. I mean, we are in, and I say it's not even just the future of work, we're in the metaverse of work, because we would have never actually had these kinds of abrupt rapid changes happen all at once. And so we have an opportunity to really not waste a crisis. How are we going to reframe this? How are we going to take the learning and apply it? And one of the things is understanding that there was poor corporate hygiene long before the pandemic started, and the pandemic just exploded those existing issues. And when I talk about hygiene, people think, brushing your teeth, or they might think of it like, just going and making sure that you're, taking baths every day or showers, or, those kind of things. It's actually quite similar in that these are just the things that we need to create a subconscious habit around because it's healthy for the organization. But I really studied Herzberg's theory of hygiene motivation factor theory. So this idea of what we've been doing for a really long time is we've been kind of managing our wellness strategies around kind of pulling people out of the river after they are already drowning instead of trying to prevent them from falling in. And wellness strategies need to look at bifurcating burnout prevention and wellness and optimization and self-care, because they're two different parts in the continuum. And preventing burnout looks at really these upstream interventions. So looking at what are the table stakes stuff that we need to be caring about, like proper pay, making sure that people feel not just physically safe, but psychologically safe at work, making sure that people don't go into work and are bullied, making sure that they have some level of agency, making sure they're not discriminated against. I mean, we look at this as these perks to manage that. That should be policy and baked into the fabric of the organization. But a lot of what's happening is we're not doing that at all. So we're now coming in and thinking, oh, well, I can just motivate my top performing people and not worry about the rest of the organizations that's chronically stressed. And it's like feeding ice cream to people that need water. And when you look at Herzberg's theories, he actually was mentored by Maslow, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs really says, like, we need water, we need, basic food and shelter, and care and respect and love. And then all of these things will get us to that point where we're optimized. Same concept within this theory is that if we get the hygiene right, if we're just taking care of people's basic needs, well, then we can move into motivation. Then we can start to increase perks and do all those things. But they cannot be optimized if people are not well. So figuring out where in our strategies we have these downstream sort of responses to upstream interventions, and they all flow together to make a happy, healthy, high performing culture.
Love that. Love that. So many gems that you just dropped here. I just want to go back to one thing as you were talking. When we think about organizations, especially high performers, that I think a lot of people here in the chat are high performers. I was a high performer, so for me, the idea of like, how did this happen to me? This can't happen to me. I know how to manage. I know the solutions. I've been in healthcare. We talk about burnout in healthcare. So why did this happen to me? So the solutions that we're looking for, I remember there was a point, and I think I posted about it yesterday. I think this job's going to kill me. I used to say as a joke to my, executive director and director at the time in the elevator, I'd be like, I'm going to die before I'm 40, as a joke. And I mean, that's not something to be joking about, but I would start to feel so disengaged and so out of place that I would make these kind of cynical comments without even thinking about it. And I would think like, well, today's the day the bus is going to hit me and I'm probably going to die before I'm 40. So these solutions that we're looking for, I want to go to a few comments here. There was a wonderful comment. Matt, do you want to pull up the one from Marie Sophie? There was a really large comment. She was talking about physician burnout. I would love to kind of pull that up if you can. It was just a couple seconds. There you go. Let's just read that. Jennifer, I'm so glad that you mentioned physician burnout and the stigma associated with admitting burnout. Dr. Jonathan Fisher's report. There's another global public health crisis impacting doctors, nurses, APPs, and all team members in the healthcare. So let's talk a little bit about healthcare, because there's quite a few healthcare professionals here in my live stream. And I want to specifically talk about people who are in leadership positions. So the managers, the team leads, the young professionals who are thinking about going into management. What do they do? And this happened to me. What do they do if they are surrounded by leaders who don't want to talk about mental health? They don't want to talk about feelings in the workplace. They're like, your wellness is your business. Keep me out of it. What can managers do to support themselves? Because they're supporting a team as well, but their wellness is not, wellness needs, the basic needs are not being met.
Well, I've been doing this talk, Exhausted Leaders Leading Exhausted Teams. And I think that's a big part, is that everyone collectively is going through stress. But I do also see, and one of the reasons why I spent time, analyzing healthcare as one of the most at-risk groups for burnout, because so much of it is legacy and sort of pride and working these unsustainable hours, or not getting sleep, and it sort of demonstrates your level of heroism, and really showing that you can hack it. And that starts right even in high school for kids that want to get into university, where then they can get into med school, and they need to have all of the right sort of things going for them, which is unsustainable then. And then they get into pre-med and med, and there's again this legacy that unless it stops at that level, there's a pause and a reset, and that legacy is switched off, it's going to be very difficult for certain industries to battle these issues of healthcare. And then there's also other pressures, like a major crisis that came out of nowhere. So you have these other, ancillary things that no one was prepared for, on top of a legacy of burnout. And that's why we're seeing major catastrophic impacts from that. We're seeing nurses quitting the industry altogether. They're leaving nursing. Physicians, I just spoke to Dr. Z. She's on LinkedIn. Actually, she's quite well known there. And she actually had been dealing with discrimination. She was an MD, and she just quit 4 weeks ago and said, I'm leaving the whole industry. I'm leaving being a physician, which I am so identified with. I love caring for people. It's so important to me, but I cannot do this any longer. So we're losing so many talented people because we haven't switched off. One of the things the pandemic has done is reminded us that this is a problem, and also became a bottom line issue. When you're seeing hospitals now not being able to stay open because there's a nursing shortage or a staff shortage, and it's going to trickle across these communities, and it really is going to impact the bottom line. That's why we're seeing these changes, and it's slow to happen. But I think that's what's important right now, is we are getting more power back. And I don't know what that means. It's TBD in the long term, whatever that looks like in the future. But we need to realize that us as managers have to model self-care and have to actually walk the talk. We can't say, here, you go do this thing that's good for you. You engage in our EAP and our wellness programming. You don't answer emails on vacation. You don't work on vacation, but I'm going to do the total opposite of that. Employees can't be what they can't see. So we need to actually walk the walk as leaders. And then by proxy of actually doing the work of self-care, we will then feel better ourselves. It will become a virtuous circle. And then it'll include not only our well-being improving, but the well-being of those people that we're trying to lead.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense to me. Is we don't want to wait until the straw that broke the camel's back. Just like you said, the other physician mentioned, I think a lot of us in healthcare. I mean, I was at the prime of my career. I mean, I was been an infectious diseases scientist in surveillance my whole life. So when COVID hit, we would talk about the H1N1, the 1918 influenza. Like, we would talk about it and read about it in books. I never imagined that I would be living a pandemic, and that I was trained to support the learnings that I've invested 10 years of my life doing. And then when the pandemic came, like you said, the leadership was already not, the culture was already broken. These systemic issues were already there pre-pandemic. So when the pandemic came, I'm trying to sort of sustain and trying to like keep it up. And then there was that one thing, the straw that broke the camel's back. I'm like, I'm done. See you later. I can't do this anymore. I'm out.
I think I love what you're saying, because there is there is an interesting connection to burnout in the cycle of actual the timeline. And when you look at the timeline, and in the book I've interviewed Dr. Marie Asberg, who is based out of Stockholm University, and Sweden is the only place in the world where we treat burnout as a medical syndrome. And great that the WHO actually included burnout in its international classification of diseases in 2019, but Sweden really does actually look at this as a medical condition that's solvable through treatment and pharmacological responses, which makes it actually less stigmatized. But what she said is when she looked at the sort of the timeline of someone burning out, you kind of have this path of hitting lows, they're micro stressors that build up, but then you snap back and then you go down and you snap back again. But it goes like that for 18 months to 2 years that the average person can sustain it. Some people like, and we find this in healthcare, for example, they've been sort of taught to emotionally distance and creating these sort of barriers around them so that they can sustain it longer. They're meanwhile dealing with a lot of physical impacts from that, but still it depends. But it's around 18 months to 2 years. And then we hit a wall. And then when we hit, she describes this wall as like a steep drop off, and we don't bounce back. We actually go in this state of, maybe sometimes as long as it took to get to burnout is as long as it takes for us to recover. She describes people with PTSD. We see people dealing with extreme anxiety, depression, even catastrophic suicides and death. Like, this is a serious, consequential issue. And so we see this great resignation as somehow being like, oh, employees are just getting their power back. That's part of it. But they're hitting the wall. They are actually hitting the wall. And so we have an extremely burned out workforce right now that is just saying, like, I'm done, literally. And when we think about this, that has major rippling effects across our economies, across, so many different sectors. And we need to make sure we don't let this happen again. We should not be pressing people to the point of breaking because it has such impact. And so you're right, like, we're done. And I think now we're seeing 41% of the global workforce saying, I quit. That has consequences.
Yeah. And I in your book you had also mentioned there were so many little funny things in your book as well. But in the book you had also mentioned, sort of in the beginning of it, I remember where you were asking us to visualize what burnout looks like. And for some people in the audience, I'd love to hear from you when you think about burnout. I know there's that image of a battery being completely low, of the person hitting the wall. We're sitting at our desk, our head down, we're completely done. There's so many different images that come to mind. So audience, let me know when you think of the word burnout, or when you think about how it feels to almost crash, or you've already crashed, you've hit that I'm done button. What does that feel like to you? I want to see some of those comments there. There's been some really wonderful discussions going on in the chat box here, so let's kind of review that. You mentioned Sweden, so we do have a wonderful person here from Sweden. Matt, did you want to bring up Rebecca O'Brien's comment from 10:24 21 a.m.? So I don't know what time zone that's going to be up in, but she says those external factors of environment and work is a huge part of our burnout, especially right now with regards to, there it is, especially right now with regards to pandemic and how workplaces handled it. And I think that all goes back to that culture conversation. I had a question from a wonderful registered attendee, and she asked, and this is another question for the audience as well. A weekend of self-care is not going to cure your burnout. True or false? Okay, that's question one. Question two is, you can be loving your job and you can still burn out. True or false? So put those in there as well. Her question to you, Jennifer, was, I am overwhelmed by my job that I love, but the job keeps expanding. What do I do?
It's remarkable to, and the whole concept of just loving your work is really a huge prophylaxis to burnout. So we tend to think that, oh, if I love what I do, I never work a day in my life. That whole, idiom that actually is completely false, because I love my job and I work really hard at it. And it isn't always a prophylaxis to burnout. And that's that, harmonious to obsessive passion piece that we need to, especially if we're sort of in that role of either leadership where we don't necessarily have a lot of control models around us, where we're sort of our own boss. That's where it's really dangerous, because we have to be our own boss. We have to kind of manage our own self-care, which can be challenging. But I think in what we're seeing in this instance, especially with the Great Resignation, there's been this vacuum of people leaving, and then leaders are there, or people that are there are just now forced to have to take on this other work, and then also hire talent, which has been really difficult. And you have a lack of resources. You're wearing all these different hats, and that is it's sustainable for a short period of time, but it's not sustainable in the long term. So it's important for us to be asking leadership in our organization, what is the strategy to pull in resources? Do we have a plan to backfill the people that have come in? How fast are we actually bringing in talent? Like, what's our attraction strategy? And those are the kind of things that we need to be considering, and how quickly we are hiring people in, because that gives us a pretty good timeline of how long it's going to take for us to then be able to release some of this. We also
Mm,
have to be careful too. When we love our job, sometimes we think we're the only ones that are really good at it, and we forget that there is other people that would love to have the opportunity to share some of that learning and be empowered to do that. I know in my last role, and I don't do this now, is I recognize that there's some things that I'm not great at, and fill in all of those voids of things that you're not great at. If there's a way to utilize shared services, we should be doing that more, and making sure that we aren't just feeling like we need to be responsible for everything, because that is a byproduct of loving what you do, is thinking that no one else loves it like you do, like it's your baby, and so you don't want anyone else caring for it. So recognizing where that happens, and then assigning tasks where you can, making sure that you are working to your strengths, power people more inside your organizations and in your teams to do that work, and then also be vulnerable. Tell your team, I'm really trying to balance a bunch of stuff. I am with you. I want to protect you from that workload too, but I want to also be able to be healthy enough to support you and be in this job sustainably. So that vulnerability within yourself as a leader is a very effective tool to make sure people are there to step up and support when you need it.
yeah, and I would be the type of person, I'm so glad we're talking about this, but like I said, I'm still really passionate about healthcare. But after the burnout, I think your mindset shifts a little bit, because you start prioritizing that I really don't want to die before I'm 40. I want to live a healthy life. I don't want to end up with all of these chronic conditions. And I suffer from chronic anxiety now because of burnout. And now I've like kind of have to live with it and manage it. It sucks. I hate it. Never had anxiety my whole life. And all of a sudden now, for the past several years, post burnout, I'm constantly having to figure out ways to keep that anxiety in check. I've kind of learned to befriend it a little bit more, but it's something that my body just now has. I can't get rid of it. I just have to manage it. But one really important thing that you mentioned, and I know we're going to go through some comments here. There's one from Debbie that I kind of want to bring up, is this idea of, understanding that you are not the only person that can do this job. Okay, let's get this really clear, you guys, if you're watching the live. You have to understand, even as a manager, there are people in your team that you can rely on, your leaders that you can rely on, and identify your strength, play to your strength. That's one of the biggest things that I learned. And unfortunately, Jen, in my previous work experience, the leaders were not quite open to the idea of playing to your strengths. It's like, this is your job, you have to do all of it. And when you're kind of reaching that sort of, the peak of your burnout, there's a really kind of sweet spot here where you can prevent it and bring people back down. And if we can make sort of minor adjustments here, where we can say, you know what, maybe Sumana should not be doing this project, we'll move her into this project temporarily for 6 months or so that we can bring her stressors down, and then we'll like change things around.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders are not always open to having these discussions. Do you have any thoughts on why that may be, and or is it just a culture thing?
Well, sometimes it takes extra work to pay attention to what people's strengths are, and it's unfortunate because we don't know how to operationalize learning what motivates people, and we need to create more tactics to operationalize that for leaders and make it not seem like it's a big lift. A lot of it can just be, like Google's Project Aristotle, where they did this, and I love this study where they looked at the top highest performing teams across the entire, like they looked at 181 teams, and they looked at the top performing teams, and these are the people that are like the genius level, amazing, talented innovators inside the company. And they found that there was two traits that actually lead them to be high performing teams. And they had assumed it was like, oh, really good at coding within this development team, or that maybe it was education, it was tenure, it was experience. No, it was emotional sensitivity, so empathy,
Yeah.
and turn taking in meetings. So these are the kind of things that we can operationalize. It's a really simple tactic once we know what really makes a difference. And so when I suggest things like a non-work related check-in that's a half an hour, but that is formatted, so it's like, how are you, just asking how people are feeling, how they're doing. Then it's, name a high and a low for this week, and have people share sort of in their personal stories what's exciting, what's motivating for me. Am I really pumped to go to the cottage this weekend? Do I love coaching my kids' soccer team? Then you can start to think, oh, that person's really lit up by this stuff. How do I extrapolate those strengths and move them around so that they're excited about work every day, and then they'll be higher performing? And then also listen for the language of stress. If people are chronically talking about, oh, I just didn't sleep again this week very well, or they're talking about their habits that are showing signals of stress, you can see it in their body language as they're sharing the non-work related check-ins. Is it difficult for them to talk about something that made them feel joy that week? It probably means they've had no leisure time. You're overworking them. So these are the signals. We have to be professional eavesdroppers and listen for those signs, and then we do that half an hour meeting every single week. That's how you operationalize building people's strengths in language of motivation, preventing burnout. And so understanding that these tactics are actually quite, easy to put into action and easy to adopt. And people don't even realize what's happening. But managers, if they have this skill, then they become really good at working towards people's strengths and then making a high performing team, which everyone, every leader loves when their boss tells them how awesome they are.
Oh my God. Yes. Hello. Can we please get some clap emojis going on here? Because that was incredible. It's so funny that you say this too, because months and months and months before I hit that I'm done here, I would literally go to work late every day. And I am never late. I am the most punctual person you'll ever meet. And I was showing up late, half an hour late, an hour late, sometimes 2 hours late, sometimes not going to work at all. And the emails would be like, I can't make it today. I'm not feeling well. I had a bad day. Or it would just be like, I'm not well. Or it would be like, not coming in. It would just, the emails got shorter and shorter, and nobody actually even noticed that there were some really significant behaviors in Sumana's work life. I had this eye twitch from not sleeping for months. I'm like, why do I have this eye twitch? And every meeting I'd sit like this and be like, there's this weird eye twitch that I have. I don't know what to do about it. Nobody cared. Nobody even asked me what that was all about.
It's really, I love that you're saying this, because we actually misdiagnose, and so often in organizations, we misdiagnose chronic stress as underperformance. There's this passionate person that loved what they do. They were really good at it. They were engaged. They got along with people. They were always there every single day, on time, ready to go. And then suddenly they don't like their job anymore. And that's why they're calling in sick, and they're on the job, but they're not there. They're making more mistakes. Like, we just think, oh, that they're disengaged because we measure engagement. You're disengaged. Okay, let's put you on an exit strategy. It's like, no, we are chronically burning them out. They're extremely stressed. And so this brain fog and this anxiety and this cynicism and emotional distance from our job and exhaustion depletion is what's causing this. And so we
Yeah.
do the noticing of the fact that someone's saying they haven't slept in weeks. That should tell us, let's ask probing questions to find out what we can do as leaders or as coworkers to lead with empathy and ask, so then maybe we can prevent them from hitting the wall or quitting entirely.
Entirely. Matt, do you want to bring up Debbie Belanger's comment at 10:40:32? Again, I don't know what time zone it is. She says, and just reading cultures when it's okay to ask questions and not having to know it all. I know in your book you did mention asking the right questions. So I want to switch the conversation over a little bit towards equity and how workplace wellness and equity are so mutualistic. I want to know from you, because a lot of the conversations that we had in our Workplace Wellness Summit last week, people were saying, well, we don't want wellness perks that give me a yoga membership or like kombucha on tap. I don't want that no more. Give me wellness perks and give me ways to measure and address diversity, equity, and inclusivity in my organization that will help my well-being going forward into this sort of post-pandemic world. What are these wellness perks that you've come across in your conversations?
Well, I think we have to look at what has been changing and what we're adopting that is, again, that with that upstream mindset. So telehealth and teletherapy are actually really good new additions. The fact that we can get anonymous support, or we can have sort of that therapy on call, we can just text someone in a moment of crisis if we need to, that we've created a connection with, that offering through BetterUp or, or Talkspace, some of those types of additions, I think are better than, say, apps that are just helping you breathe better, or, listening to rain for 15 seconds, those kind of things. And I know that these technologies have become more robust, but understanding that you need one for one part of the like I said, the continuum, and another one that really helps you actually deal with your own mental health and illness. We're seeing a lot of companies now adopt mental health first aid training,
Mhm,
which I
mhm.
think is so fantastic. I mean, 400,000 companies in Canada alone have actually brought that into their organizations, which is huge. 600,000 Canadians have actually taken it on their own. So we can all, and this is obviously Canadian data, but we're seeing a lot of this too in the US. Great examples of firms like Edelman, for example, have adopted these ambassadors. So they train them up in mental health first aid, and then they help everyone know, okay, this is where you go to get access to these peers that are trained up. You can access them at any time. They will come and help you. So these are the kind of things we want to be investing more of our money and our budget into, because uh, it's great, again, like I said, to have some of those perks. Hewlett Packard, for example, is now sending people home with meal kits and dinners instead of making chefs available on site. So there's a reduction of life on site, more like if you come into the office, I'll send you home with a way to be more with your family. Like these kind of things, it's more about creating the office space as being a place that you go and you have some collaboration and you focus on connecting and being together, but that's not necessarily where you're going to live. And the life on site within campuses and these tech companies that built these massive campuses that are supposed to keep you there all day, all night, that's changed. And now we're seeing this desire to try to maybe be inclusive of things that are happening at home instead. And these are just small examples, but it's about thinking, okay, we've changed. We faced our mortality for the last 2 years plus. What do people really want? They want to have the ability to have anonymous feedback. So we want to create that space. We want to be able to feel heard, that there's empathy from our employers, that they care about what we care about, that we're not forcing people back into a situation that creates social anxiety. So hybrid is really important, and making sure that people aren't just going to work in a ghost town. Don't make people commute into work to put them on Zoom. Make sure that everyone is there together at the same time, so that we can have different ways of thinking about gathering, collaborating, having fun, bringing fun back to work. I feel like work right now is like going to school and only engaging, your employees in like spelling, math and science all day. There's no gym, there's no recess, there's no extracurriculars. And I don't mean like just forced fun. I'm talking about like really making friendships and giving people time to just collaborate and have fun, but not make it so that they don't have any time to do that because we're in, back-to-back Zoom meetings all day. Make this more strategic, make it more formulaic, but also make it serendipitous, and including more of that kind of serendipity that we're really feeling lost without right now.
Love it, love it, love it. I mean, the idea of having, and I used to do this with my team when I was working in healthcare, the idea of having like workplace recess. I mean, why not? My whole brand is dependent on learning joyfully. Like, why should learning have to be so strict and so? I mean, I went to a private school, so we would get beat up if we didn't, learn our languages or know our math and our times table. But that was a different time. Nobody beats students anymore here. That was also in
Yeah.
Dubai, so things were different there. But I want to talk to you a little bit. I know we're running close to about 50 minutes here. There's some wonderful comments here. I'll bring this one up also. Oh, I've already brought that one up. There was another one that I saw here from Sheree. Sheree is another amazing healthcare professional. She said burnout happened way before COVID, and band-aids were used to attempt to fix huge problems. So one of the solutions that was presented in sort of the workplace wellness and equity conversations was around developing targeted programs for wellness, equitable targeted programs for wellness, and learning. So merging the idea of learning and development. In the past, we would have these like, learning webinars and things like that, where it would just be like, go and sit in a conference room for a half a day in your lunch and learn, which by the way, I hate lunch and learns. Please don't invite me to a lunch and learn. Like that's my
No.
lunchtime. I hate it.
Yes.
But what can we do in terms of targeted learning that can integrate wellness and learning and development and boost that employee engagement, and not in that formal way, but more in that joyful, kind of fun way?
Yes, and I 100% to lunch and learns. I say we should not, that's it's a workplace perk and benefit to have continuing education. It shouldn't be like, oh, well, you have to give something to me if I'm going to give something to you. Like we need to have understand that continuing ed is really just good for your employees and good for you because it establishes higher performing organizations. It increases revenue, all those things. So the way that we need to be thinking about this is switching from, okay, we're just going to come together and have those back-to-back meetings that we would have had on Zoom at home. We need to, well, first we need to not have as many meetings. We've increased it by 252% according to Microsoft's recent data. From just over this last year, we're having 252% more meetings. I mean, that's just not okay. How can you have fun if that's all you're doing? So again, meeting fatigue, deal with that, reduce the amount of time that there's workload, because we can't do any good collaboration and healthy fun at work if we're not dealing with the hygiene. And those are the hygiene things we need to do. So create space, making sure that when we get people to come into work, again, understanding that there's risk to hybrid and fully remote when it comes to diversity and equity, because yes, we're able to attract more talent from diverse groups. So there's that side. But on the flip side, if we just make it someone's choice to come in when they want, we're going to see this disproportionate impact where women have to be at home because they are the ones that are being responsible for pickup and childcare and all these things, or they have to come in late because they're the ones that are primary caregivers. These types of issues really play a role on removing women from this opportunity. So it's strategic. Bring people together. Happiest companies, according to the data, is a person comes in once a week. And the team, this is the perfect ideal, is that we come in one day a week and it's all focused on team building, connecting. The day is focused on that. You do some fun, you do some sort of collaborative thinking, you sort of lay out your week and make plans for the week. You have calls to action, and then you use other tools like asynchronous meetings and these other tools to be able to feed back into that plan. And then you meet, set up again, have your, kickoff, and you do a mix of all these things together. Some days, some of those days can be more heavy learning, or like I said, continuing education or upskilling or reskilling. Then it can, again, change week to week. But that one day a week, just make it about collaboration and then let people go and do their own thing to come back to that time together. And this is where then you get visibility. Right now we're seeing our younger workforce feeling like their careers atrophy because they're not getting one-on-ones or visibility with their managers, or able to establish their brand. I'm the creative one, or I'm the one that really likes numbers, or I'm the one that really is focused on detail. I mean, whatever it is, like you need to, in the early years, establish who you are. And you can't do that fully remote or virtual. You're not getting the time. So we also need to understand as individuals, I know we're happy and cocooned in our little lives, but fully remote isn't actually the healthiest for us either. We're humans. We're meant to be part of tribes. Our mirror neurons need to share so that we can actually feel like we're connected. So we need to understand that there's a Goldilocks zone, and that one day in that workplace where we're connecting, and then 4 days away is like what I've been saying is like the perfect place for us to live right now.
Love that. I mean, a lot of organizations I don't think are there yet, especially not here in the government sector. Maybe some of the private organizations are leaning towards that more. I know when we were talking a little bit about like leadership and some changes that we need to make, it is so hard to be identified as someone that is beyond just your job title. So audience, if you're thinking about all the different, personality hats that you wear, take those off and put new ones in every day. And you don't have to be the same person every single day, but you know your signature strength. Mine is I'm a fantastic network leader. I love networking and collaborating, but I'm also super fun. I like to like have, laughter in my space. I love to create communities. That's something that I really love. But there's also a research side of me. I love research. I love reading papers. I love data and evidence based, but I'm not going to put that hat on every single minute of the hour. And one of the biggest things that I've learned from having to quit my job, which was very routine, you go in and you do the same thing every day. There's no creativity. There's no room for any kind of flexibility, to becoming an entrepreneur, is that my day every day is very different. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to Jen on TikTok, and now she's here on my live show. I mean, how did that happen? I don't know.
I love it.
So my last question, audience, if there's any question, put it in the comments. We're just going to do a couple like last minute questions here, and then we'll wrap up. My last question to you is again on leadership. In your book, you mentioned that trust and communication are some of those significant predictors of well-being as being a leader. And there was a whole chapter about being an empathetic leader and using creativity in your leadership. Now, leaders who are a little bit more bureaucratic, a little bit more strategic, I mean, there's different types of leaders. How can you train them? And is it even possible to train someone empathy if they don't have it? I know this is a tough question.
It is really important for us to understand that, first of all, in our hierarchical sort of way of managing, we move people into people leadership roles. And just because that's how we continue to give them more pay or more status, and they shouldn't necessarily be people leaders. They're probably excellent individual contributors, but managers and leaders are very different. So we need to understand that if you're moving people into these people management roles, they really do need to have empathy and figure out a way to celebrate really great individual contributors that might not be their skill set. Because again, we're discriminating between extroverts and introverts and different types of personality traits. And so we don't want to do that. We want to separate that. Yes, but also when you have low empathy, so it's not innate. It is hard skill to build. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work, and we need to spend a lot of time actively listening. And there's ways to practice actively listening. One of the things that we have to do is, again, if you're a leader, take one meeting where you don't speak at all. Just don't speak. Like, you can say yes or no or whatever, but leave the floor to other people, making sure that you're giving everyone a chance to speak. Again, having these opportunities to have dissenting opinions. So create meetings where someone is actually playing the role of being the contrary thought and giving people the power to sort of speak back to you in a way that's just, whether they believe that opinion or not, put them in the black hat every single meeting that you host it like this. I call it the RBG dissenting robe meeting, where, you put on the robe and you dissent for the hour. These are the things that we need to do to build the ability to hear different thought, making sure that we're bringing diverse opinions into these meetings, making sure that it's not only one person that tends to take over, create strategies for lots of different opinions to be shared and heard, and then be in a situation. And we saw this in really strong trust organizations inside of the pandemic, is give access to senior leaders. So put a CEO, in these environments where they are giving, information, maybe 15 minutes of the meeting where they're giving information out, but then they give an hour away to people to ask them questions and find out, what people care about, what they're thinking. That's how you create empathy, and then start to action that. What did you learn? How do we create the plan based on what I'm hearing back? We need more leaders to actually go inside of social collaboration chats and in ERGs and walk around hospitals, walk around, floors and see what's going on, learning and listening and gaining data and feedback, and then actioning that. So these are ways we build empathy if we're not good at it, but it really does play out. And we saw this in when we did the sort of employee trust index inside of these organizations, that employee trust was really high when they had accessibility, there was transparency, and they had leaders felt like leaders cared about what their feelings were. And so all of that then just translates into a more empathetic culture.
Yeah, and I used to do two things. One was the what Jared is saying is give the quietest person in the room an opportunity to share their thoughts, and maybe they don't like to share it in a larger space, but do a little bit of that one-on-one and identify. So there's managers here identifying the difference between a manager and a leader. I think is important. But managers, if you're managing a team, get to know your people. They're all very different, just like your five fingers here. Not everyone's going to be the same, so you're going to need to interact with them differently, but also find solutions so that when you do kind of a group meeting that it really fulfills and fills their cup and they don't feel like, oh God, I got to do another check-in with Sumana. Like I absolutely hate it. We don't want that. We want them to learn. We want them to have that input and like, well, what do you guys want to do? Do you want to sit, 30 minutes in like a little boardroom and watch a TED talk together? Or do you want to go for a walk and grab a coffee and just kind of like, talk about, I don't know, the last Nicki Minaj song that came up. I don't know. It could be anything. We really need to adapt to our teams, and I think your team will then get to know you a little bit as well. There's so much more. I could talk to you for all day.
Me too. It's so great. And I love how much the audience has interacted. So thank you so much. Your engagement is just so amazing.
I love it. I'll pull some more up here. I know you talked about employee resource groups. So Jared Almond is our culture collaborator, one of the key members of the Workplace Wellness Summit committee and Workplace Wellness Summit and the employee resource groups. We've talked about different variations of how culture can play a huge role in that determination of like, do I stay or do I go? Am I done? This culture is way too toxic for me. I do want to bring you back and continue another conversation with you. Hopefully we can sort that out at another time. Before I let you go though, I want to ask you something fun just to keep things light and breezy. What are you listening? What is your top song on, and you can look at your phone. What's your top song on your iTunes list right now? What are you listening to?
Do you know, this is sort of embarrassing, but I don't know why I love Sam Smith's song, like Love Me More. I don't know why. It's so cheesy. And I put it on and I think about my oldest, daughter who's gone through just so much of this difficulty through COVID, and it's been really painful for her. And she's in this stage now going into 15, and there's so much just like analysis of her face and how she looks, and she never feels pretty anymore and stuff. And we've been really trying to work her through this stage of feeling happy. And so this song is kind of like, I just have to love myself more, and I have to get good with myself. And something about it makes me want to blast it and dance around the living
I
room.
love it. Hey, that could be your TikTok, like viral TikTok. I'll help you.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I love this. How to reduce burnout. Love yourself more and you'll be fine.
I think that's it. That's going to be your 5-second, 7-second TikTok viral. It's going to go so crazy. I will share it with everybody. It's just, I'm going to like duet you. It's going to be huge.
It's going to be huge. I love it. I love it. Me being really lame, but loving myself in all of my lameness. So
right. And that's it. And we're all lame in our own ways.
yes.
Like we all have our kind of little quirks. And thank you, audience, for being here. Share your quirks. What's the one thing that makes you kind of unique and authentic and makes you love yourself? Put that in the comment. Oh, I will share with you. Oh, I do have a winner of the Starbucks gift card. So let's not forget that. The winner of the Starbucks gift card, I wrote your name because it was a draw and I had to pull the name out last night so I didn't forget, is Jolie O'Shea. I love your name, O'Shea. Like sounds like very like shea buttery. Jolie, you are the winner. I will email you so you can get your Starbucks gift card. I did ask a question about why are you here today? Put that in the comment and let me know why you're here today. The video's comment will win another gift card. And what did you learn today? Put that in the comment. We're going to continue this conversation. I'm going to take a leave now. Please say goodbye to Jen. Wave, say bye in the comment. Give us some thumbs up emojis. Give us some heart emojis. And we will, Jen, if you don't mind staying, we'll just chat in the green room for just a couple more minutes. But we can end the live stream. I will say bye for now. Bye, everybody.